All right, the Dow is at an all-time high right now. It is following on the highs, of course, we've been seeing the S&P and NASDAQ on almost a daily basis here. Again, just to hold to a gain of a little bit more than a dozen points would cinch it for the Dow. All three market averages running into record territory. Now, a lot of this buoyed, of course, by better than expected earnings and the prospect that after three rate cuts in a row, the Federal Reserve can stand pat and everything will be hunky-dory. That and the fact that we're closer, I stress closer, to a potential trade deal with the Chinese, and both sides are echoing that, although they've echoed similar things, is washing out whatever fears might be out there of an impeachment. You don't have to be on the right or left about that to know that it could be a market-jarring event if it ever gets to that stage. For now, the markets clearly do not appear jarred. We've got Politico congressional reporter Melanie Zanona. Normally, we're talking remotely, not so today. We've got Stanford School of Business lecturer Dave Dotson. I would have prayed for a professor like him when I was going through this rigmarole, and the former Ted Cruz campaign pollster, Chris Wilson. Welcome to all. Melanie, what's interesting about the impeachment stuff is that increasingly I talk to investors who are factoring in the president will likely be impeached in the House. But they posit that to say, wait a minute, not in the Senate. So no worries. What do you think?
You're exactly right. Yes, it's looking increasingly likely that the House is going to impeach the president, but there is a near zero chance that the Senate is actually going to vote to convict him. And that's because you need 20 Republicans in the Senate to break with the president. And so far, we haven't seen a single one do that. So perhaps other than adding an unwanted chapter to the president's legacy, there probably won't be any tangible effects of impeachment that should infect the markets. Now, that being said, the one thing I'm looking out for, and that I'm sure investors are as well, is whether there's a government shutdown. In fact, the president was asked yesterday, are you willing to shut down the government now that Democrats are trying to impeach you? And he did not rule that out. So it's something we're looking out for. Congressional leaders in both parties don't want to shut down, just to be clear. But at the end of the day, the president does have that veto power.
It's interesting, Chris, too, because I talked to Linda McMahon, the former SBA head for the president, who's now raising money and bundling that money for him. It's a curse of riches. They're raising money hand over fist as a result. What do you make of that?
Well, what the president has done from a fundraising standpoint, not just on the large donor side, which is what you see McMahon in charge of, but on the small donor side, is take really about 8 to 10 years of Republicans running behind the Democratic Party in terms of technology and donor base and erase that deficit almost overnight. And it's been an impressive operation because what it does is it is now frightening the Democrats because they know they're going to be so heavily outspent. I saw David Plouffe, President Obama's campaign manager from 2012, or 2008, tweeting out that the president being on the air during the World Series is unprecedented. It never happened in American politics before, someone being on that early and with what was a good ad. So I think from that standpoint, what McMahon is doing on the super PAC side, what the campaign is doing through Brad Parscale and the overall donor building there is going to have reverberations for the Republican Party for years to come.
Professor, one of the things that's interesting here is that the money obviously is coming in. No matter what side you're talking about, it can drive each base. I get that. But what's interesting about it, too, is that the president is also benefiting in battleground states, not in national polls, but in battleground states from that improving economy. Now, that could be short-lived. Polls are fickle. But what do you think of that?
Well, first of all, Chris, I was interesting that you said the money issue, because going into this election, we could find something very different, which is that money doesn't matter like it used to be, and it really becomes an issue of data. And if I could just comment on something Chris said, is that the president's got a 2.5-year head start, because he's known for 2.5 years that he needs to find the 50-year-old woman in Wisconsin and find out what's going on in her head, whereas Elizabeth Warren's got to worry about South Carolina, which won't matter. So he's going to be collecting all of this data, which is not expensive to collect, but it's going to be a treasure trove going into the 2020 election. In terms of the earnings and the economy, I think what matters is what is the 27-year-old in Michigan, what are they thinking? And I think they're going to ask two questions. How am I doing? And does this person care about me? And in 2016, they said, I'm not doing very well. And this guy, Donald Trump, who, by the way, is a real estate mogul who flies around with gold-plated, bathrooms, he cares about me. He gets me. And so they voted for him. They're going to ask those two questions. They're not going to care about what the stock market's doing.
It wasn't the World Series pitch that you remembered, something to the effect, not perfect, but better. That's what he's going to be saying, right? I'm not a saint, but what I'm delivering is the goods. How How effective is that?
Well, what's really important, especially about these economic numbers, is that now it gives the president a counter narrative to this impeachment probe. He can say, while the Democrats are busy trying to impeach me, I'm working for the country, I'm working for the economy, and I'm working for you. And that's why you hear Republicans on Capitol Hill really urging the president to stick to that message, to not get too consumed by impeachment, to focus his Twitter fire on things like the economy. And I know, Neil, you've talked about this too, and not try to get bogged down in that. The challenge for the president is can he stay on message,
do that, right? I mean, but it's hard to do it when people are trying to throw you out of office. Not to make a comment about them, but Adam Schiff today was talking again about pretty soon we're going to have open hearings. We're already releasing transcripts from some of those interviews. And the only reason I'm showing my age here, I can remember with the Richard Nixon impeachment stuff, I was 2, but what I do remember, something like that. What I do remember is it started out with the overwhelming majority of Americans saying this was a political hit job and it was a waste of time. And then it changed as hearings went on in the House, then later with Sam Ervin in the Senate. I'm not saying the two are remotely comparable, even in the economic environment, but does it worry you that this could be a drip?
Not so much, because I think it is a very different economic and political environment than it was whenever Nixon.
And that helps. It helped Bill Clinton, didn't it?
It did. Well, that's where I was about to go next. Is I think it is a more comparable, is a better comparison to look at what happened with Clinton. You didn't see any Democrats break against him. I think you maybe see one in Romney perhaps break against Trump, but for the most part it won't be. And the fact is that under any other environment, the less polarized partisan environment, with the economy we were under right now, there wouldn't even be a question about re-election. But because of the polarization of the environment and who Donald Trump is, I think it creates a more difficult situation for him. But even all that said, when you look at the way the Electoral College breaks it down, all Trump really has to do is get about 47-48% of the vote to get re-elected. And right now, I have to say, whenever I analyze the polls on a state-by-state basis, there is not a national election. There's a state-by-state election. He looks very good in the states that matter. When you bring up Michigan and you look at other states that are going to make the difference here in the same way they did in 2016, Donald Trump right now is very well positioned.
And we forget that. When you think about it, David, we look at these national polls, which were borne out accurately the last time. We forget that Hillary Clinton was favored to win by a couple of points. She won popular vote by a couple of points, but we miss the fact that it's a state-by-state contest. In a state-by-state contest, the president stands pretty good, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, Chris. I mean, given that the economy's doing well, he should be crushing it in those states. The states that matter, the 6 states that really matter, it's kind of a flip of a coin, but what we don't know is, one, we don't know, who he's running against. So it's a little bit like shadow boxing right now, right? And the
Let's say it's Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren. Well, I think it comes down to, people discount Elizabeth Warren and they say, because her economic policies are kooky, okay? But what doesn't matter is what I think. What matters is what the welder thinks in Wisconsin or some state.
By the way, we have a calamity going on. All bets are off, right? I mean, the meltdown certainly greased the skids for Barack Obama, taking nothing away from him.
That's right.
But if we didn't have that meltdown, it might have been a much more competitive race.
That's right. And so, but the second piece of it is whether China is going to buy all those agricultural goods, because those purchases.
You've always had your doubts.
I do have my doubts. I don't know why I don't always trust the Chinese. I can't tell you why.
Yeah.
But those agricultural purchases are going to be between June and August of next year. And if they come through, he's going to win Iowa.
That's right.
If they don't, I think he's going to have a hard time in Iowa. And I'm also curious about Texas, because everybody's talking about Texas being a swing state. There's a lot of agriculture in Texas.
Yeah, Texas is a swing state. I think 2018 was an anomaly there. You look at where Governor Abbott's win over Lupe Valdez was far more representative of what Texas looks like in a traditional environment. And I think the only thing that would change that is if O'Rourke switched over and ran for Senate. Now they said there's zero chance that he does. I'd say it's 50-50.
Well, he would never let down that. You're damn right we're going to take your guns away.
Well, you're right. He wouldn't. And it would not look anything like it did in 18 again when he ran against Ted Cruz.
Okay, there's another development I want to share, and maybe, Melanie, you can help me with this. It's an interesting study they did on the virtues of a 4-day work week. Microsoft in Japan experimenting, saying it increased productivity 40%. What'd you think?
Well, first of all, I would point out Congress is already on the 4-day work week plan. Sometimes
So
it's
it
a
doesn't
3-day
always
work
work,
week, and it doesn't always work.
Very good point.
But in all seriousness, I think corporations would not move to the 4-day work week unless there was evidence that it could help their bottom line. It does appear that if you shorten the work week, they are under pressure to come up with the deadlines to get things done. They also were experimenting with things of shortening meetings, doing less face-to-face meetings, more chats. But it'll be interesting to see whether other companies follow suit.
Apparently, they took fewer sick days and were much more careful about the time they took off, period. What'd you make of that?
Well, when I used to run a company, we went to 4-day work days, and it was shift work, so it was 24 hours a day. People loved it. The problem, I think, Melanie, that people are going to have is if, IBM is on Monday through Thursday and Microsoft is on,
that's a great point.
What happens on Friday? So the problem is we all sort of need to line up from a work day. And also, I got to tell you, I'm a little skeptical on how they come up with an even 40% increase in productivity. I deal with a lot of data, and you can pretty much make the data these days anything you want. So I'm skeptical.
Especially if you were doing, let's say, squat nothing. And then you're doing 40% more than nothing. It's always...
Well, look, if you were the CEO of Microsoft and you had a 40% improvement in productivity, the next day you would be doing that globally.
Well, there is that. There is that. But it's changing people's view of what is a productive worker.
Well, the way it's reported is changing people's view, but I also think it's very difficult and problematic to take the environment that exists and the type of worker that it takes to be successful at a Microsoft and then try and plug those into other industries or other verticals and say, okay, because it worked at Microsoft, where you do need to be refreshed to sit and write code. I do it, and you do it on an ongoing basis. I mean, it's challenging. Having said that, if you watched the recent documentary on Bill Gates, he was anything but a 4-day work week guy.
Absolutely.
In terms of building the company up. He worked 7 days a week, and really it's 20 hours a day. So I think to take what's going on in Microsoft and say that we can apply this across the board to other industries is myopic.
Yeah, I told my producer it was a stupid idea for a segment. I don't know why I did it. All right. There goes that quest for a 4-day work week. We have a lot more coming up.